Hello YouTube and welcome to my first ever long form video about an educational topic. The title is What Are Life's Terms Exactly? Subtitled How to Know When You Know. Now, in the process of making this, I had an even bigger vision for this subject, and I will make another video soon where I use the entire system to step by step prove some of life's rules which I learned for myself. But for now, I'll just give the basic rundown of each stage of research and experimentation as they are. This is my first video like this, as I said, and I'm reading off of torn out sheets of paper, so bear with me. Let's get into it. All right. So first off, I want to describe the six ways you can know something. Because there are six, yes. One is by evidence. For example, if you drop a cup and it breaks, you now have evidence that dropping that cup breaks it. Or a detective finding fingerprints and DNA that match a certain person can place them at a scene. That's evidence. Now, number two is knowing something by inference. Now, inference is like, for example, when someone is wearing rain boots and holding an umbrella above them outside and you can see them through the window, you can infer that it's probably raining outside. Now, the reason it's considered a way of knowing something is because even though you can be deceived from time to time, it's generally so accurate that the deception is statistically impossible. So that's why it's considered knowing something. And now, number three, you can know something by comparison and or analogy. For example, if you have general sewing skills and you've been sewing a long time, you can probably sew a simple wound shut. That's how you know by comparison. That's another way to know something. Now, number four, you can know something through postulation. Now, a postulate is a sort of assumption that you have to take in order to get to the knowledge. For example, if you assume that application of force creates motion, then you know that pushing a chair will make it move. So that's where theories and knowledge kind of become intertwined. Now, number five, negative or cognitive proof. Now, this one is, almost, I'm pretty sure it's definitively accurate. But, like, for example, if someone makes a statement that all swans are white, but you've seen a black or a brown or a blue or a green or a red one, you know by cognitive or negative proof that that statement is false. So that's another way you can know something, and it's accurate. Now, number six, the least accurate, but one we all rely on much more than we realize, is testimony. For example, you know your own birthday because someone else told you. No matter how much proof you have, the proof you truly have is that someone told you. That's testimony. But we accept it as truth because by all reasonable rationale, it should be true. All right. Now, let's get into the actual step-by-step process. Now, I'm going to list to the best of my ability all the different facets of research and experimentation, and I am listing them in order of priority. Now, the reason I list them in this priority is because some have more solid concrete evidence than others. Let's get into that. Now, first, we want to use historical data, right? Like, if you have data on, like, how many of this thing that country bought, or how many of this many people did this at what time, you can usually get very reliable data on that as long as it's not hyper specific or involving invasion of privacy. And because of those limitations and others, that's why the subjective things often have value as well. So next, after using history, we want to move on to hard sciences like chemistry, biology, physics, things that we have tested over and over again, and it more or less is history, but it's experimentation history, so it's a specific facet of history that needs a little bit more attention to understand. And so next, After that, we want to go on to the softer sciences like psychology, anthropology, stuff like that, like child development psychology, stuff like that. Because obviously it has value. Yes. So now you see we're moving into the more subjective stuff. So after that, then we want to move on to things like philosophy, spirituality, and religion. Now, the reason I place those later is because it's really easy to get carried away in the idea that all these people before you have collected all this wisdom and you just have to take their word for it. And don't get me wrong, a lot of it's spot on. But always just rule of thumb going for it is not a good idea. You want to have history and science to back it up, right? Okay. And now after that, the next two stages, now you can do like ritual stuff. Like this is not necessarily dangerous unless you make it dangerous, but you can do all kinds of rituals. It doesn't just have to be plain old spirituality. You can do something physical or chemical or whatever it is that you're doing, like drinking coffee or whatever. I don't know. And sometimes that gives people a certain state of mind or a certain kind of experience. So there's some value in that. And because even if there's nothing concrete, it still originates from the human brain, which might tell us something. See what I'm going? And now finally, the very last one, and this is one that I'm not saying I recommend. I'm not, especially if some people should just never, but all I'm saying is it is a possibility, it is an option. I'm just informing you that this is something that some people do. And I can't lie, I have done a little of myself, and I have had the results I was looking for, is experimentation with substances. Now, you want to do that type of thing in a very controlled fashion. I was raised to be very, very critical of those types of things, and I was very careful, very careful. I don't want to get into it though, because I'm not promoting it. You understand? It's just a step that is there, and you have to go through all the others first before you want to even consider that, because you want to know you can be objective, right? All right. So now we'll move on to how to use history, right? So let's say we want to get a little bit of info on life's terms. Like, let's say, hey, we want to see overall happiness, right? Let's start looking there. Like, I want to find out what makes people happy. So let's say, what's the happiest country in the world? Well, if you look it up, the current answer is Finland. Apparently it has been for like 8 years or something at least. But okay, so now we have a very widely researched and studied, well recorded, documented, accurate poll taking thing that has been done by a dozen or more different organizations and communities throughout a dozen years or more. And so it's accurate data that we can say that they really are probably the most satisfied, happy people. All right, so we got that. We learned a little bit, right? But that doesn't tell us about life's terms. That just tells us where some of people that might know a little bit about it are. So now we want to ask why, right? So when you look it up, they don't have obviously percentages and just actual hard numbers they can give you, but here's what the numbers can give you in terms of how many people have said the same things. So it's testimony, so considered valid, right? And so Finland has the happiest people, and that is largely attributed to factors such as a strong sense of social trust, freedom, and a deep appreciation of nature. So boom, right there, we just successfully used a bit of history to narrow down some of life's terms. According to statistical data gathered for dozens of years, humans tend to thrive when there is a sense of community, a minimal amount of chaos and interference, and they have a connection with nature. And the reason that we can presume this to be an accurate presumption is because they're the happiest. Now, if they were in the middle, maybe we wouldn't take them so serious, but they're the happiest, so they have a very high chance of being the ones who are accurate about it. Okay, so now let's move on to the science aspect, right? Now, I'm not gonna, now, like, us experimenting comes later, but first I'm gonna tell you how to research stuff that's already been done. So, now we move on to science, beginning with accepted theories in the scientific community. meaning well regarded and well spoken for by people who have proven themselves through material success in their experiments, right? And so now we'll start, for example, with biology, right? Chemistry, and then move on to physics, and then anthropology and psychology. Notice we still begin with the more concrete sciences first, right? I'm always going to repeat that part. We need to go back to basics first. So let's ask a question and get some answers using the science in that order. So, what foods, environments, interactions, etc., have positive or negative effects on our brains? Now, using science such as chemistry and biology, and in some cases physics, we can actually determine why people feel a certain way in response to something. Now, for example, vitamins, having the proper amount of vitamins, nutrients, enzymes, proteins, carbohydrates, sugars, salts, acids, etc., having the right balance of those has been proven through science and technically history that we require a specific, or not at least specific, but we need at least a very relatively close in general amount of these things, right? So we now know that. And I know I'm not getting very specific, but the point is I'm teaching how to research, right? So you ask these things. Now, another thing is environments, right? So weather generally, not always, but generally has a widespread similar effects to most people. For example, it's being sunny out is generally considered a happy thing, whereas it being stormy out is generally considered a sad or fearful thing. And the reasons for that is because in before the times of having security and shelter and all that, if we were exposed to the elements, our mood, our chemical reward system in our brains aligns with what's good for us and shies us away from what's bad for us, right? So that's using science as an example to prove that environments have a effect on us, and people have already done this research, so we're looking this up and finding those answers. These are answers that I have found by looking these things up. And now another thing is when it comes to interactions, even the slightest gestures from one person to another can greatly impact their mood, whether it be for a slight second or even days. Now, an example of this is someone is having a hard day and they just got told that they just got off work overtime and they have to come back early in the morning, so they're in a hurry to get back home and rest as much as possible, and blah blah blah, everything keeps going wrong, and then one person just trips right over them, falls over them, like it injures them, and now they literally can't go to work at all. That little interaction had a huge effect. I know it's physically, but let's say he didn't get injured and only fell over, that could still piss him off in a really great way that might limit his ability to think, and now he's making bad decisions that further impact him. So that is using psychology to prove fundamental laws of nature, aka life's terms for us humans here on Earth, right? So now we have established how we use all the different sciences to determine something, right? And one more thing I want to add, just because how could I not, is that it has been proven through statistical research that deep connections and great powerful bonds that we have with other people, we indeed live longer and actually experience an overall higher sense of satisfaction. So now we're getting closer to life's terms, right? Using all of the science and history combined at this point. And now we're even going on to soft stuff like psychology. Like I explained, we're using that stuff now, and now we're learning shit from that. All right. So now that we've learned how to perform research properly, let's get to the place where our own minds come into play. Again, we begin with the most grounded methods. I can't say that enough. First, we learn to run experiments of our own, and in order to do so, we will always adhere to the scientific formula, which is as follows. 1. Observe. Observe things around you, whether it be sight, smell, feeling, sound, whatever it is. Observe something that sparks a question or a curiosity within you. Second, formulate those ideas and feelings into a question that you want answered. 3, do some background research to gather information that others have already found on the subject. Look at that, more grounding. It's not even the first step that time, it's repeated in the middle. 4, hypothesize. You want to propose a testable explanation that can be proven wrong or right. Now, step 5 is experiment. You have to design and then conduct the experiment. Step 6, analyze. Go over the data and compile it all together in order to get some round figures in your head. 7 is conclusion. Summarize the knowledge and insight gained from it, thus answering your question to the best of its ability. Now, this method is honest and accurate at best, and non-declarative at worst. What that means is it doesn't really go one way or the other. At worst, it never gives you false answers. That's why we use it. Okay, so now that I've shown you now that I've explained the scientific formula, I'm going to show an example of me using it and using multiple aspects, well, mostly psychology, but I'm going to be using psychology to do my experiment, because I actually have done this experiment before and in many forms. So I noticed that at games, whether it be video games, board games, or sports, I noticed in general spectators are usually in a more volatile or more downtrodden mood than the active players, except for cases when the active player is relying on a spectator to some degree. So, my hypothesis, and I did research, so let's say, let's explain how I did some of that. So, I looked up a little bit of sports psychology, looked into teammates and all that, and found that if you're cheering for your guy on the sideline, it's going to give him a little bit of oomph. This is actually a thing that does happen. That's why a crowded stadium cheering for you has a massive impact sometimes. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it's powerful, right? So I looked into that and found that out, right? And so, I found other information on that, but we're going to move on to the hypothesis phase. Now, my hypothesis, people want to be included and feel listened to and respected while included. So, how do we test that? Here's the experiment. 4 people sit together at a table. All 4 are given the same basic instructions out loud. They are all instructed to pay attention, learn the rules to the game, and then play it together to the best of their ability. But unbeknownst to 3 of them, one of them has been instructed to pull their phone out and pay attention to it and interact with it the entire time. So they have been given 2 sets of instructions, which technically means it's on them to actually choose, but we all know that when someone's given secret instructions, we generally prioritize that because we think that's the new real mission, psychology. Now, so what do you think happens in this situation? Well, after testing it in many different varieties, and as well as the direct one I've described, the person on their phone usually becomes the target for ridicule and punishment by the rest because they valued their own understanding, the real rules, as well as the other guys valuing their understanding of the only rules more than trying to pause and reflect and think deeply about it. Rather than challenging the box, they were pitting themselves against each other. And so that goes back to, we know that the way you interact with people can have an effect on them. So now we know one of life's terms is maybe try to be on the same page with people, right? So now we just use science to make our own discovery. about humanity and thusly about life's terms as a human. So now from here, now we move on to the fun stuff like religion, well, some people think the other stuff's more fun. I enjoy all of it, obviously. But now we move on to religion, philosophy, and the likes. Now, keep in mind, philosophy and religion and all that, it can be a sort of a shortcut to give you all kinds of wisdom and insight that was gained by others, and like people have lived longer than you and you want to learn that lesson young, so you don't want to have to experience the things that give you the relevant information. Trust me, I've been there. Sorry for the way I'm talking like this. So yeah, I know what that's like. And so we want to be careful with how we do it yet again. So we want to always be willing and ready to go back to the other things, but now we can at least feel free to pursue things that aren't completely linked down to the earth. All right. So now, we can hear about, ethical dilemmas, the trolley problem, stuff like that. We definitely shouldn't start with that. Oh my goodness. So, but we want to get into all kinds of, moral principles, and, you don't want to necessarily commit to any lifestyle or culture or whatever, but you want to be open enough that you blend into it. And like the only way you should stand out is if somebody asks you your specific feelings on it, because you want to give it a chance. You don't want to fight against it, but you do want to remain objective, right? So, for example, I practiced Zen Buddhism for a couple of years. I gave meditation a try, and I gave the concept of their spirituality a try. Ultimately, I didn't end up resonating with the spiritual aspect, but the meditation was great. Oh my goodness, it helped me psychologically and even physically. Like, awesome. Like there's value to this stuff, for sure. And like I learned from Christianity, like a lot of my morals and like my like deeper functions and guidelines for how I operate is based on being raised Christian and Catholic by my mom and pops, and going to church every Sunday until I was like 14, and at that point was publicly saying that I wasn't really into it anymore. And I'm not bashing on anyone else. I'm just saying that the point was, I see the effects that these things can have, and I take note of them, and I try to go back to my history and my science and all of my grounded stuff in order to come back and bounce back and try again. And you can always try the same religion 4 times in your life. I went back and forth, you know what I mean? Like, I might turn again. It's not about what I think is right now. It's about continuing to learn, and that's really the point. Because if you think that you're right now, you're not. At least not totally, you know? So, yeah, like we see how religion and philosophy can help, It can save you years in in effort of learning your own things the hard way. Like it saved me, but I still spent some years relearning some of that stuff anyways. And so like, right? But don't get me wrong, like I love it. Especially the theoretical shit that no one has answers for. I love it. So, yeah, we've got that all done, and now the next one is like rituals. Now, I don't know a lot about rituals, but I understand like basic principles, like repeating mantras or like doing the ohms. Like I have done meditation, that's a ritual, So I understand the overall principle of like how it works, and basically like one of the most common things in rituals is just taking something simple and repetitive and doing it over and over in order to achieve a certain type of mind state. Sometimes they believe a certain sound or a certain pitch or a certain quality about it can be just so different and make it utterly different in its full spectrum. But I don't know enough about that to really do it justice, so I apologize for that, y'all. Um, but on to now the most careful thing. Like this is one I honestly like I don't even recommend for the average person. Like I think that a person should be very highly educated and very self-aware, and like they should be like checked out by a therapist before doing this. Like honestly, honest to God, in my opinion, like I started too early with this stuff, and even though I was smart and careful, I still wasn't as careful and aware as I could have been, and I regret that. So when it comes to using substances and anything that can alter your chemistry or your mind or your perception in any way, what you want to do is you want to do medical research on actual hospitalizations and like side effects and stuff like that, clinical research, freaking the stuff before certain things are released, because some drugs are over the counter, right? And some of the most powerful ones. And so you want to do your research, right? And you don't just want to stop researching there. You want to find the people who are speaking against it and hear what their arguments are that go against whatever opinions you heard. You want to hear conflicting stories. You want to see data driven results. You want to get down to the bottom of it, and I mean down to the bottom. You do not want to play around. You have to be so careful, right? And so after you've learned all that stuff, then you can start learning about the anecdotal evidence about people saying, oh, well, it was my experience to do this. Well, it was my experience to do that. Because if you listen to that first, you might die or end up insane. So do not take someone's anecdotal evidence when it comes to mind-altering substances. Please, I beg you. Okay, so yeah, soon I'm going to make another video where I go over every single step in order as it pertains to an actual series of events and discoveries for me, because I feel like not only will it be cathartic for me, but I feel like it'll hit deeper and sink into people's subconscious and like let them really like absorb it way better if I do it that way. I'm just sorry I had that thought like in the middle of preparing this. I only had 2 weeks, and I know that sounds like a lot of time, but if you've watched my channel, like not only do I train several hours, a week, but I also, have pets to take care of and a wife and, a whole ass life to do, so yeah, but I was really happy to do this, and I hope some of you guys like it, and, give me feedback.